Thank you. I now call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Rockford School Board to order at 5:33 p.m. Please call the roll.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor? Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 5 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Rod, who's helping out, Rod and Connor, who are in the back helping out with the production of our board meeting tonight. I would remind everyone to hold your questions during presentations until the end, and then we'll ask some questions. So I will first ask, are there any changes to or corrections or additions to the meeting minutes of October 6th? Seeing none, we'll approve those if everyone's all right with that. Thank you. We will now move on to performance monitoring, and Mrs. McCulloch and Mrs. Detman will present their report. So go ahead.
Hi there. Is the slide deck, can you put the slide deck up for this report? It's titled Fiscal Year 20 Year-End Results. And while you're doing that, I'll start. I'm going to use that for some highlights, but overall the district, we're going to talk about the year-end results. We had a good year financially. At the government-wide level, which is recorded on the full accrual basis, we ended the year with an increase in net position of $35.5 million. So if we look at this, let's go to page 3. That's our revenue. You can see that like 94% of our revenue comes from 3 sources. First one, operating grants and contributions are 40%, which was up $29.8 million. A big part of that is the $23.3 million that the TRS is given us on behalf, but we're also going to see that as an expense, so it kind of negates itself. It's just a way that you have to do it for the, or recorded for the government-wide revenue information. So we have 27% from evidence-based funding. So that's up $11.7 million from the previous year. And in addition to that, we got $7.9 million in the CARES Act. And that also equals itself out. We have to bring it in as an expense before we can even put it for a revenue. So those are both equal. So actually, if you go to slide 9, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth. It shows you that we're up $21.5 million in our general fund. And remember that our general fund consists of numerous smaller funds that are operating the transportation. Those are on an alternate slide as well. Let's go back to slide. I'm sorry, I didn't finish. So we're up 27% in property taxes, which is, I was finishing out the 27% on the general fund. Now I'm back into other revenue sources. The third large revenue source is property taxes. Areas that we are down, we have received $5.7 million less in the CPPRT, and we have received $7.4 million less. $7.4 million less in the CPPRT and $5.7 million less in transportation. The decrease in transportation is because we didn't buy any buses, and to a smaller extent that we transported less students last year. And we approved earlier some interfund transfers to help balance those out. If we look at slide 5, now we can go there. That's the expenses. 75% of our expenses go to instruction and pupil instructional services. It was up 8.9% from last year. And remember that part of those expenses are going to be the $23.3 million to TRS, and it's a bookkeeping piece. So it's really not an increased expense, just like it wasn't an increased revenue, because it's a flow through. If you go to slide 6, it talks about the expenditure highlights, and part of the reason that we had expended less last year is we have $6.8 million in vacancies that we didn't fill. And we had a $4.1 million savings in purchases, supplies, all those kind of things that we spent less on because we did a better job of bidding and costing items out. Our actual net expense was up $9.3 million in the general fund. And let's see, if you go to slide, is that 6 there? Try slide 10 for me. There it is. So there's the 6.8 million in vacancies that we spent less, and the cost savings of the 4.1 we spent less, but our overall increase ended up being $9.3 million because there was additional expenses, $1.6 million, that brought us to an equal 9.3. I'm doing my best. I know that the finance people will answer any questions that I'm creating for you. So at the end of the year, which is what I started to say, is that we were in a better place. So let's go to slide 15. Our total operating, is that 15? So our total operating funds for 20 were 12.7 over the previous year, so that was an increase, and that left us with a fund balance that is, I just got a number, 45%, and we as a board have deemed that we have a policy of having at least 25% of our operating funds available. But next year, okay, Tim, you're just gonna, this should be your report. In 20, we ended up with an operating surplus of 12.7, whereas in 21 it was an operating deficit of 9.3. Because of the surplus in 20, we ended up with a fund balance at 45%. This year, because of the deficit budget, we're already on track to have a 42%. So clearly is still above the 25% we need, but less than it was last year. So, so there's other increases and decreases between the two accounting methods, but this is just the high-level overview, and you had the slide deck ahead of time. If you have any additional questions about that, we can ask those at the end of the presentation. Right now, I'd like to present Nick Cavallari, partner with Baker Tilly. He's going to talk about the fiscal year audit, which is required by the Illinois state statute on an annual basis. It consists of an examination of individual and combined financial statements. It's conducted in accordance with the generally accepted auditing standards. The administration has provided a draft of the comprehensive annual financial reports, which you have received, and ISBE's annual financial report for your review. Nick, I give you the floor.
Thank you. I'll wait for my slide deck to come online. that looks familiar. All right. Thank you very much. No, not a problem at all. Should have seen how my last presentation went. When I was trying to do it over Zoom, the echo was terrible. Okay. Well, I presented the slides to the board in advance of our meeting. I'm going to just briefly go over the fiscal year 20 audit results. Our audit procedures are substantially complete. We've provided draft reports to the administration. I understand the board has also received those reports as well. We are anticipating to release our opinions, our reports on your financial statements by mid-November. One of the things that is going to be somewhat held up is that the district received a significant amount of funding under the CARES Act, about $8 million in funding. There is a compliance supplement that the federal government releases for which the auditors are required to use to test those award dollars. That compliance supplement is still not released from the federal government. So we can't complete your single audit, which is a federal compliance audit that we perform as part of our audit procedures, until that document is released. We heard in the fall that it would come. Right now, that still has not happened. So we do have until March 31st of 2021 to finalize the issuance of your single audit. I would imagine that we would be done well in advance of that once that compliance supplement comes out. We have performed some procedures on that award based on our understanding of the grant, and we don't believe that there'll be significant delays in completing our procedures once that comes out. So the scope of the district's fiscal year 2020 audit is pretty extensive. You can see that we are engaged to audit your comprehensive annual financial reports. There's Illinois State Board of Education annual financial report. There's a schedule of expenditures for federal awards. There's another document called the Consolidated Year-End Financial Report that is required to be audited by the Grant Accountability and Transparency Unit in Illinois. We perform a single audit of your major programs for federal awards. There's also an Illinois Community College Board set of financial statements and compliance testing that we perform. And then we also issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and other compliance matters in accordance with governmental auditing standards. There's quite a few different documents that we render assurances over during the course of the audit. Our anticipated results, I say anticipated because our reports aren't released, but our anticipated results are that we will yield an unmodified audit opinion or a clean audit opinion on the district's comprehensive annual financial report. It's the highest level of assurance that you can receive from the external auditor that your financial statements present fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We're also engaged to render opinions on the Illinois State Board AFR, the CFA, and the CIFR, and all of those documents we anticipate yielding an unmodified audit opinion as well. There is a Illinois Community College Board set of financial statements and compliance requirements that we're required to test as part of your audit. We are going to yield an unmodified audit opinion on that document, and we also did not identify any compliance matters when we tested your controls with compliance and the compliance as well. So clean audit opinion on that document as well. The district's single audit consisted of two major programs this particular audit cycle, which consisted of your Title I programs of approximately $18 million in federal awards, in addition to the COVID-19 Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Award of approximately $7.9 million. We anticipate rendering unmodified opinions on your compliance with those federal awards. In addition to, we test controls, which are required to be done to ensure that you have appropriate controls to ensure compliance is maintained. And we did not identify any risks along the way when we tested controls. So clean audit opinion is anticipated on your use of your federal award dollars and the controls associated with them. One of the things as external auditors who work in the governmental auditing arena, we're required to render a report on internal control over financial reporting and any other matters that might come to our attention over the compliance with laws and regulations. This is required under governmental auditing standards. We are required to gain an understanding of your internal control environment over the preparation of the financial statements themselves. We do that for planning our audit so that we appropriately design audit procedures to address any risks that we believe are important to look into during our audit approach. During the course of that, if we identify any risks that we believe warrant the attention of governance or, quite honestly, management, we'll report those in our reports. I'm pleased to let the board know that we did not identify any material weaknesses during the course of our audit procedures. So a very good job over the preparation of the financial statements. Also, the piece of compliance with laws and regulations, no matters during the course of our audit identified non-compliance with how amounts would be represented in the financial statements. So a clean audit opinion on your report over compliance with internal control for financial statement preparation. Under auditing standards, we're required to communicate if we had any difficulties in performing our audit or if we had any disagreement with management regarding estimates, accounting principles, things of that nature. I'm pleased to let the board know that we had no such issues during the course of our audit. This is just a quick slide. When I was here last year, I was telling the board that there was going to be a new accounting standard that had to be implemented for your fiscal year 20 financial statements. Due to the pandemic, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board issued another pronouncement that allowed everybody to be delayed in the implementation of all the new standards. So the fiduciary standard wasn't necessarily required to be implemented in fiscal year 20. However, that will need to be implemented for your fiscal year 21 financial statements. And just something for the board to kind of start thinking about. We'll work with management. We've had several conversations about this. But what's going to end up happening is your student activity fund collections and disbursements and ending balances will be presented within your comprehensive annual financial report within the general fund. So that's going to be very different from what you're accustomed to seeing. It's just something to be aware of, that change is coming down the pipeline. Again, just to reiterate, we anticipate finalizing our financial statement audit by mid-November. Completion of the single audit is going to be heavily reliant upon the issuance of the compliance supplements. And, overall, I just want to also let everybody know that this audit couldn't have went any smoother. And it wasn't just because, people didn't work. I mean, people really put forth a great effort. We'd never stepped foot in your office. We worked completely remotely. Every one of our requests was met very quickly, very promptly. We shared files, we shared screens, we had Zoom meetings. I mean, we literally did everything that we could to conduct this audit and stay on pace with the time frame that the board has to issue the financial statements. And they really did a phenomenal job. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understood the level of commitment that the business office put forth to make sure that we had everything that we needed in order to feel that we were comfortable in completing our audit procedure. So great job to everyone this year. I'll turn the floor over to any questions that the board may have at this time.
Questions from the board? Mr. Rollins.
Just a clarification, I always ask this question from a high level. We look at results in terms of our operating funds. It's hard to, there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice this, but from our operating funds, from the standpoint of our operating funds, taking out the capital expenditures and all of that, my understanding is we had a change in net position of a little over 12 million. Is that correct?
12.5.
Pardon what?
That was 12.5.
Right. Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thanks.
So to end that, the third year, this is the summary. This is the third year with no material weaknesses. We have internal controls which are working, and the monthly financial reports that are being used are reliable for making our decisions. That audit will be brought forward for a vote at the November 10th board meeting. And thank you very much, Baker Tilly, for being here and following up with that report in person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
All righty. The next, we have two board policies. Why don't we present both of those, and then if anybody has any questions, they can be addressed after we finish both of those. And these will both be coming forward also at the November 10th board meeting. The first one is 4.60, which is operational services. So the administration would like to amend the policy to reflect that all the contracts as needed will continue to be reviewed by general counsel, but they propose changing the threshold from $10,000 limit to a $25,000 limit for those contracts requiring board approval. That $10,000 threshold was established in 2014. Actually, the policy started, 2008 with no threshold. And then in 2014, they put in the $10,000. But it's not been updated since that time. That $25,000 is consistent with bidding threshold and is what most districts use for their thresholds. The superintendent will continue to manage the district's purchases and contracts according to state law and the standards set forth in the policy, and of course applicable to other board policies or administrative regulations. The second policy that we'll be voting on is Board Policy 5.180. This one is about temporary illness or temporary incapacity. It's been revised to indicate that if illness, incapacity, or other conditions caused a licensed employee to be absent in one school year, after they exhaust all of their available leave, for more than 90 consecutive work days, such an absence may be considered a permanent disability, and the board may begin dismissal proceedings subject to the state and federal laws. In addition, the language describing the district's longstanding ability to require a job-related fit for duty examination was added to the policy. And finally, language describing the district's practice of paying benefits under the Illinois Workmen's Compensation Act for injury arising out of and in the course of employment was also added to the policy. Does anybody have any questions on either of those?
Mr. Siegel.
Do we have any idea how many contracts are going to be at the new, how many contracts would have been at the old threshold that won't be? And could we see a list of what they are?
Part of the reason I'm bringing this forward is because now we have that budget, that contract attachment, the budget attachment, which you see most of the contracts. So if they're on the contracts page there, and I could share that out with you again, then they would not come forward. And then we can make a purchase as long as there's not a contract tied to it, well above that. You see that on the purchase orders and the accounts payable. So really the item that's different here is whether or not general counsel is looking at the contract terms. So that's why I'm bringing forward, like, all contracts would still go through legal, but it's just that threshold that'll be raised. There's a lot of contracts that come forward. I mean, for us, $10,000 is not a lot of money for just about doing anything. So like a power school contract would be, we had one that's $12,000. I mean, I can certainly bring that forward if it wasn't in the budget attachment. But with what we're seeing now and being very transparent with all of the contracts, if it's falling outside of that at 25, it could come forward. I could pull just the $10,000 ones and show that separately. I could send that to you.
So David, I didn't ask that question specifically, and I think it's a good question. One of the questions one of the comments that Michelle did make was that at all the professional meetings she's attended, and in her conversation with other CFOs, other districts, that the classic or the typical threshold is 25,000 and that our 10 is low. But I do think your question is really valid. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Tim.
Mr. Rollins.
Sorry, my question is on 5.180. I guess I'm just looking for an explanation for why we are calculating this 90 work days from the exhaustion of all available leave, which was not really in the policy before, which to me leads to some pretty odd results. So, junior teachers that don't have a lot of accumulated leave, they can be considered for termination 90 consecutive work days after they've been gone. Somebody who might have a lot of accumulated leave we have to wait until they exhaust all of that leave and then can't terminate them for permanent disability for another 90 days. So what's the explanation for that?
I see Mrs. Holdley.
Good evening. May I respond, Ms. McCulloch?
Okay.
Yes, please. I wasn't sure if you or Matt would take it. Go for it.
Okay. This is all based upon various case law that is out there. And yes, it does lead to some really odd results, but that seems to be where the courts were leading. For teachers, I think what you'll see is we already have very generous leave of absence policies in the contract itself. And so I think it would be, even for new teachers, it would be well beyond the 18 months before they would be considered permanently disabled anyways.
Okay, well, thanks.
All right, if there's no other questions, those will both come forward next on the 10th for a vote. Next on our agenda is the academic performance results of school year 1920. And you all received this slide deck in your packets or in the board docs. We'll look at maybe a couple of pages, but you also received most of this information in your board update last Friday. As you know and read, the pandemic and resulting school shutdown limited what data was actually available. So there's no state standardized tests because they weren't administers. The juniors didn't take the SAT last spring. Instead, they took it this fall as seniors. And the state didn't figure new summative designations, and instead those designations just will carry over from the previous year. Some of the highlights are that there was little change in graduation rate, freshmen on track and 8th grade passing algebra. And if we take a look at the slide deck on page 12, gives us the graduation rate figures. Is it possible to put that up there? And these are based on a percentage of students that graduate from high school in a 4-year cohort. And until it gets up there, I'll just say that this year we were up from 66 to 67%, which is considered pretty flat, a very slight increase. I'm on page 12. And I'd also like to indicate, or, just take note that our goal for that area is 86%. So little ways to go. We have not changed that goal for next year. So, and the next page, page 13, which you're on, so go ahead and leave that up there. You were on 13. That would be growth on track, not to read, but the percentage of students on track to graduate, which earn 12 semester credits and no more than 1 semester F in a core course, which include English, math, science, or social science. By the end of the year, our strategic goal is 87% on that. And slide 14 shows us that, that's freshman on track. Yes, growth on track. In 2020, we had 63%. Now, according to Matt, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, I have the strategic goal as 87%, and you have it flat at 86 for freshmen on track. So it's either 86 or 87%, but nonetheless, we stayed flat at 63% for 2020. The third area was the growth of students passing Algebra 1. That's using integrated math, which you all know we changed to. So we're looking at the percentage of students who complete Algebra 2 or integrated math 3 with a C or higher. We're looking for a 87% for the school year 21. The 8th graders, we're looking at this from the 8th graders passing Algebra 1 last year, and we had 26%, which is flat, and our goal for the Algebra 1 is 31%, and they're maintaining that at flat. So the strategic goal will be passing Algebra 1, and utilizing and include not just 8th graders, but up through integrated math 3. Let's see. So another note on this report. This year's Illinois Report Card, the state marked its traditional categories with these labels. Data unavailable due to COVID-19, possible data impact due to COVID-19. The second one, possible data impact due to COVID-19, means the numbers have been calculated with concerns because of the suspension of in-person instruction. So our data is limited. I don't know if you remember, certainly we all remember the last board meeting where we discussed the system-wide framework for improvement. And that is expected to guide us through this unavoidable pause. Dr. Jared told us last week that we're going to focus on the following. Instead of focusing purely on academic achievement because of the issues with the COVID-19 and the types of learning that we are providing, we're going to focus on quality peer review, the school scorecard, standards of service, and standards of practice. And we were given a schedule on which we'll be following those at the last board meeting. Also, we're not going to proceed with detailed reports by grade level this year. Instead, regular reports to the board will be embedded. So we're going to receive a timetable for framework building and reporting in the last board update that you saw in the last board update. With the academic return on investment, there will be semi-annual reports on the topics that we as a board have chosen as highest leverage, which is tier 3. And we'll be looking at one of those tonight, and very important, which is tier 2, to move the needle on student achievement. We'll also have updates on attendance, which you also saw in your board packet or your superintendent update, on-track data, and student engagement. The year presents an opportunity to build better accountability, to determine what does success look like and how we're doing with that. Finally, although the administration will provide recommendations, the decisions, whatever decisions are made regarding accountability, remain with the board. So we don't have any vote on this particular report at next week's meeting, but if you have any questions, I'm sure Dr. Vosberg would, or Ms. Detman would help us with answers to those. The floor is open. Ken?
I'll start. I don't really have a question. I just want to make a comment that it's extremely frustrating that we remain well below our target for freshmen on track and graduation rate. And my fear is that we're going to get worse because of what's going on with how we're teaching because of the pandemic or whatever. So I think we have to really keep focused on trying to drive the areas that we can, and certainly I think we can do that. So I don't want it to be an excuse that, well, you know, how can you teach anybody when you got a pandemic going on? Reality is we can teach. We just need everyone to be engaged in the process. So that's a comment. It's not really a question. So anybody else have questions? Don't see anyone else. Jude, go ahead.
So Ken, the reality is yes, you can teach, but how well will we do at getting accurate measures, metrics to see how successful we're being? So time will tell, right? The next item on our agenda is the board update on charter school performance. So remember, we have 3 of them, right? Galapagos, Legacy, and Jackson. Just for a refresher, Galapagos and Legacy began serving students in the 2009-10 school year. Jackson began in 10 and 11. During the 1920 school year, they served 3.2% of RPS's total population. So that was 841 students among the 3 schools. That's 841 students of our 26,314 students last year, based on the fall housing report. So that we tried to upgrade, not tried to, we did upgrade our accountability structures on the contracts that we passed. And so there's two channels of accountability, the legal contract and the school performance. So surprise, surprise, the part on school performance is very difficult to do because just as with our district not having information for our update, the charter schools do not have their performance update either, we're unable to hold them accountable to that part of their contracts. But for the legal and contract piece, we still have some questions about student verification for fall enrollment at Galapagos. And if Dr. Wolf is there when we get along, we'll find out, because their numbers were due to us yesterday and I did not receive an update to find out if we had received those numbers. So we'll ask that at the end of the report. Our Welcome Center, in partnership with the Charter Office, have a system for verifying student enrollment, and so they have been working with Galapagos to verify that enrollment, but as yet we don't have it. So my understanding is the students enroll at the charter school, but then their information is sent over to the Welcome Center and we verify that it is a student. And I asked if we verified if they actually live in the district, and that is not part of our verification process, interestingly enough. So the 3 charter schools offered family their choice for this year, just like the school district did. For the rest of our students, of either in-person instruction or remote instruction. And so the in-person instruction rates for the schools are as follows. Galapagos has 56% of their students in person, Legacy 48% of their students in person, and Jackson 40% of their students in person. And remote instruction is provided using cameras and learning platforms. Specifically, I think Jackson is putting a camera in the classroom so that they can teach the remote as well as online simultaneously the same lessons. The Charter Performance Report and related renewal recommendations matrix became part of the agreements with Galapagos and Legacy in 2019. Accountability was seen in a 3-year renewal rather than the previous 5-year renewal. Jackson was given a 2-year renewal in 2020. With metrics included that would result in potential notice on non-renewal. Prior to the Charter Performance Report and Matrix, Jackson had been given a 5-year renewal, so that changed to 2-year. We all remember voting on that actually fairly recently. Last spring, right? An updated CPR, or Charter Performance Report, is provided with the ESSA-related items being of significant note in your packet. The upgrading of the legal contractual monitoring over time, it started back with Dr. Weissman, and using a checklist and a base camp as core tools. As part of the updates to law and local desires, Ms. Goldsmith, previously Ms. Simmons, I had to go through that a couple times in case any of you are with me on that, assisted with a legally based review of the procedures and tools. It's now a public-facing tool, and a report for each of the charter schools is attached also to your board docs. The compliance elements are included as an indicator as on the Charter Performance Report. All right, questions, comments on our charter schools update? There was a lot of paper on that one.
There was. A lot of reading to do. Any questions for Jude? Yeah, I guess the only question that I would have is, what caused the delay from Galapagos in their number reporting?
Well, not only is that a question, but is Dr. Wolf there to answer if we got the number?
Yeah, he's on his way.
Good, thank you.
Alrighty.
Good evening. Yes, we did get the numbers confirmed today. And so part of the process is the families start off at the charter school, but then the documentation comes to our Welcome Center. And in 2018, we redid those procedures in partnership with Ms. Ruber. and we do verify residency and all of those things. So getting all of the documentation lined up at one point in time was slower with Galapagos than we like, and we will have new timelines next year for them. But they have 382 total students, and we'll update the enrollment report to represent that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for verifying that other question. When I asked it, and it wasn't of you, I was told that we did not verify residency. So I'm glad to hear that we do. Okay, the next three items that are presented are all reports, and they all have to do with positions that we have put in place to help support teachers in their teaching model. And so because there's three different groups and they all have that support mechanism, I'm going to report on all three and totally confuse you with all the, it's an acronyms. And so then when you come back, you're gonna be like MCL, CIL, da da da, but nonetheless, let's give it a try. And then let's hold the questions till the end of the whole group, if you don't mind. I can't see if you have one anyway, so. The district, sorry, the district, we'll start with, how about we start with instructional coaches? So we launched that model in fiscal year 18. And the first year we had 17 coaches. Some were shared between schools, but then in 19, we gave each elementary school their own coach. And then in 21, 4 elementary schools chose, remember now we're doing the site-based budgeting and 4 elementary schools chose to use some of their budget money for an additional coach. And 4 middle schools also chose to spend some of their building funds on an additional instructional coach. So right now we have 32 instructional coaches throughout the district. They're hired and trained and supervised by Susan Fumo, who's the Executive Director of Improvement. Principal partnership with instructional coaches is essential. It's not the most essential, but it's essential to the success of this model. Though coaches meet as a team each Friday, the secondaries meet in the morning, the elementaries meet in the afternoon, and the time is dedicated to professional learning, planning for curriculum deployment, development of PDSA cycles, looking at student data, and other topics depending on the time of year. The coaching model is student-centered and was developed by Diane Sweeney. Each coach receives in-depth training on the model when they're hired, along with ongoing practice and skill development. Coaches document all coaching cycles with teachers, noting the focus of learning, chosen strategies, and student growth progress. 3 years of data show that about 86% of elementary teachers participated in voluntary coaching cycles. Preliminary data also indicates that teachers who participated in a coaching cycle had a greater student growth on their MAP tests than those that corresponded to that same time period. The coaching model is currently in phase 2 of a 3-phase rollout. Phase 1, the implementation focused on teacher participation in coaching cycles, was deployed into schools. So now phase 2 is focused on sustaining improvement of teacher practice. And then phase 3 will focus on strengthening effects of coaching on student achievement. The instructional coach model did meet its initial goals. You can see that in the annual review form, which has been attached to the agenda. So moving from instructional coaches, our second group of support is the multi-classroom leaders, the MCLs. And we are putting those together with the aspiring teachers, AT. So if you see those abbreviations. It began in the fall of 2017. The program aimed to achieve 3 goals. The first goal was to increase the teacher pipeline for recruitment of high qualified teachers. The second goal was to leverage our best teachers to have access to more students and to impact more of their peers. And third goal was to increase student outcomes both academically, socially, and emotionally. The MCLs are paid a stipend of roughly $8,000 a year. These are full-time teachers we already have, and that's a stipend that they receive on top of that. The aspiring teachers are paid $15,000 per year. They're also offered a housing allotment. The MCL program has operated with some pockets of success. Through this current year, we've hired 12 aspiring teachers. So the aspiring teachers are paired with the MCLs. And of the aspiring teachers that we had, we have 12 that we have hired to become full-time teachers. Those students have indicated they definitely felt like they were more prepared to take over a classroom versus a regular semester experience in student teaching. During the first year of implementation, the kindergarten classroom grade level teams that had the MCLAT had larger growth in their maps, and the 5th grade classrooms indicated a reduction in major office referrals. Program continues to be a unique tool for recruitment when they visit colleges and universities, but we still have challenges in implementation. After the first year, the central office support has not been consistent for both principals and for MCLs. School supervision was not at the level principals needed to have confidence in supporting and leading the initiative. In addition, the director of teaching effectiveness has a turnover, and that is a central position. So there's not been consistent support for the MCLs to further their craft and leadership and execution of the program. Finally, we've seen aspiring teachers leave the program early for a myriad of reasons. The turnover of aspiring teachers does not allow for us to look at data and compare it to other classrooms that did not implement the MCL-AT program. So the status of the program, we currently have 17 MCL ATs in 9 different buildings. We did have budgeted for 18, so we didn't fill all those. We allowed buildings some autonomy to hire first-year teachers who needed more support but show promise. The board approved housing stipends for aspiring teachers, and 4 of the ATs are taking advantage of that. We will learn the success and areas of improvement for the young professionals, but because of the aspiring teachers we have seen leave the program early, we now have them sign a promissory note to help ensure they stay for the entire school year. And if you're wondering why they leave, some just go after their first semester to a full-time job. We all know the shortage of teachers that's out there, and it's, to go get paid a full-time salary as compared to $15,000 can certainly be a draw. And as I stated, some are feeling like they didn't have the support that they needed from the central office because of the turnover. So, from the director of teacher effectiveness. So to that end, we designed roles and responsibilities for the central office staff involved with the program and updated the guidebook for MCLs and principals to help design their school-wide plan, but also how to execute that plan. And finally, the district began a PD, a professional development framework for the buildings. The first session was held in October. The MCLs have been required to enroll in our teacher leader pathway for continued professional learning around leadership. The MAP data and FURL data is going to be complicated this year to evaluate the success of the program. But hopefully we'll be able to support buildings in executing this program, and that in itself will be a good indicator on whether the initiative is heading in the right direction. The third group of supports, curriculum implementation leaders, CILs. This is a position for secondary schools only, and it was created in 2018 to provide consistent support for curriculum implementation. And it is part of the district's curriculum design process. It was meant to connect and align instruction, mentoring, professional learning communities, and data analysis. And it aligns to Goal 1, growth and achievement. And the curriculum deems have been an effective way to maintain communication and alignment between the district office and each of the school's PLCs. Summer work time with the CILs has been valuable to continue revising and improving the curriculum across our system. So the costs have varied year to year as the project has scaled up in alignment with our 5-year plan for the curriculum. All 12 secondary schools are impacted by the initiative. The middle schools are allocated 1 CIL for each of the 4 core content areas, and the high schools are allocated 1 CIL position for each core course. The cost, year 1 was $252,000 for 41 filled positions. Year 2 was $462,000 for 73 filled positions. And year 3 was $551,000 for 87 filled positions. Each of the CILs is paid a stipend of roughly $6,300. So there's 3 areas of potential misalignment that the district is looking to fix to improve the impact of the CILs. First of all, collaboration with principals. The hiring process needs to be more collaborative between the curriculum deans and the building principals, and the PLC agenda setting should not be a choice between any competing interests. The time for the CIL time. Many of our CILs accept overage teaching assignments, or they take on important additional tasks for school operations. That puts pressure on their time and the time they have to support their peers. Additionally, lesson study feedback and the PLC conversations reveal value in CILs having the ability to push into peer classrooms for observation, for feedback, and for collaboration. And if they have limited time, they're not able to do so. The third area of concern is academy alignment. High school scheduling for academy purity sometimes makes it difficult to fill CIL positions, especially when they're across academies. Our CILs may attend a minimum of 2 meetings per month with the curriculum deans. They participate in 2 professional development days per year, and they complete up to 7 days of summer work per year towards curriculum development and revision. As part of year 1 of any new curriculum rollout, SILs help monitor the administration of common focus skill assessments to ensure that those assessments are given and that data is collected. In year 2, we monitor administration as well as student proficiency data resulting from those assessments. Since 2018, these first 2 years of implementation of the SIL position did not have consistent data about the focus skills assessments. In the first year, many teachers did administer and score those, but in the second year, teachers experienced challenges. The fall FSAs due to technology outages, spring FSAs due to school closures. This creates a gap in attempting to use this metric to evaluate the position. We will use a different form of measurement to define effectiveness of this position moving forward, including revised implementation plans, participation in professional learning, and meeting frequency. As part of my prep for this meeting, I asked to have information about the amount of time each of these positions, the SIL, the MCL, and the instructional coaches are being pulled from their positions to fill sub vacancies due to our staffing situation. And I'm pretty excited to report that the times that have been pulled have been extremely minimal, and it seems like more for a period here or there, or as compared to a full day movement out of their position, and especially with the MCLs with brand new aspiring teachers in their classrooms, the fact that they're not being pulled. But it's hard enough to determine whether or not these programs are successful with all of our challenges with documenting achievement. Better yet, if we didn't actually have them doing the jobs that we've hired them to do. So, does anybody have any questions on any of those items?
I'm just giving you a heads up that we have seven and a half minutes left in the 60-minute allotment. So I have one question. Mrs. Fumo might be able to answer this one, I think. I'm not sure. And that, on the MCL, is that maybe Mr. Zedeker? The numbers confuse me about the dollars, because on the second slide, it says anticipated or planned total cost is 84,000, and then it says the actual is 651,000. Was that because we did it in more buildings? Is that?
Well, more buildings, and then with our new AROI, we calculate direct and indirect costs.
Okay.
So professional development time for teachers, and then how much administrative support. So the way we calculate it is a little different from than when we started.
Okay. Mr. Rounds.
I guess sort of an overall comment about when we do these PSAs for an academic return on investment. For most of these programs, and there may be exceptions, but for most of the programs, I would think what we're trying to figure out is, are they contributing to our strategic goal of increasing student achievement? And it's hard for me to pull out of some of these how we're measuring whether these programs are actually increasing student achievement. In the academic coaches, there's a little bit of that data, and one of them is sort of an internal measure of whether students before the coaching cycle were proficient versus at the end of the coaching cycle, but then that doesn't really compare to teachers who didn't use the academic coaches. So I'm not sure that this really shows that the academic coaches themselves are effective. The one that I thought would show that they're being effective is teachers who participated in coaching cycles and had above average MAP growth. So in 2018, good data, 62%, over half, who participated in coaching cycles had above average MAP growth. 2019, it's only 40%. So less than half the teachers who participated in coaching cycles had above average MAP growth. And then in 2020, it just says not available. And is that because of COVID, or why is that? I mean, that's MAP, that's internal. Did we not do MAP testing in 2019? We couldn't finish it. All right. And then, we're short on time here, but I mean, these are sort of important issues. On the MCLs, I was really having trouble pulling out of that. Where are we measuring whether or not what we're doing is actually having an impact on student achievement? And we have schools that have MCLs, we have schools that don't have MCLs, and I would think that it would be relatively easy to measure the impact of an MCL on student achievement versus classrooms that don't have MCLs, but I don't see that we're doing that.
So, Mr. Rollins, let's do this. Because we're short on time and because we're allowed to bring things forward to the next meeting, and in fact, I thought about just bringing this whole piece forward to the next meeting. Let's ask administration, and I'll have conversations. I'll do follow-up myself, but let's get a report on just the questions that you're asking about metrics to develop, and we'll talk about that next Tuesday, if that's all right with you.
Great suggestion.
All right, because all I have left is to tell you that there's two items coming for board approval under the consent agenda item on November 11th. One is the third-party security renewal date. And prior to September 2019, we had no multi-factor authentication. The tech department moved forward with an initiative to implement the security initiative with all RPS 205 business software, following the NIST digital identity guidelines outlined in NIST 863B. The multi-factor identification was implemented across many RPS platforms. However, an expansion to non-traditional or non-standard secured platforms is the next phase to enhance our security posture. So Mr. Barthel requests approval to renew the current third-party security license for 5,001 users and upgrade the licensing to Elevated Edition. The upgrade provides the ability to implement a secure gateway to RPS 205 software that doesn't directly integrate with the current level of subscription. The total cost is $66,825 annually. In the first year, the software cost is $39,312 and $100,000 for 5,000 hardware for a total of $139,312. We'll vote on that next Tuesday. If you have other questions, you can tell us. The second one is Smart Learning Suite software renewal. The district's heavily invested in our smart boards. We have over 1,700 deployed across the district. In the summer of 2019, we deployed 375 new smart boards to the middle schools to replace older equipment. Professional development for the new boards and the Smart Learning Suite was conducted by Educational Technology and the Turney, the third-party vendor. To continue to support those investments, Mr. Barthel recommends we renew the annual licensing for that Smart Learning Suite. The annual cost is $32,400 for 1,800 licenses, which is $18 per license per year. And that's all you'll see next week, although on November 24th, we will see 2 PDSAs, a Tier 1 recurring contract, but we'll worry about that on November 24th. Okay.
Great.
That ends my report, and all I have outstanding is to bring forward for further conversation the 3 areas of support and how we're measuring our return on investment, a more accurate indication. Thank you, Mr. Gravano and the board.
Thank you. Great.
Oh,
Thank you very much. You can take a breath now, okay? Mr. Rollins and Mrs. Yar will present now the Planning and Development Report.
Okay, we've got a couple of big rock items, so I'm going to try to get through the smaller items more quickly. The first item is one of the smaller items. The resolution to approve notice of November 10th, 2020 public hearing on the e-learning plan. This is not the remote learning like we're doing now, and this is something that's required by the state, and we are the last district in the area to get their e-learning plan submitted. What this really is we're not going to have snow days anymore. So if there's a snow day, it's going to be, the kids are going to be doing remote, what we're referring to as remote learning, or what this is calling e-learning. And this is the plan for doing that. So does anybody have any questions about that? If not, this is going to return to a vote at the November 10th, 2020 board meeting. Second, also, you should all be pretty up on this. As you know, we purchased a different piece of property and moved our operations support center there. The current building, which is on Kishwaukee Street, then we are going to put up for sale. So the administration is recommending that the Board of Education approve the public sale of the building and property at 1907 Kishwaukee Street, setting a minimum sales price of $100,000. Sealed bids would be opened on January 8th, 2021. And the highest qualified bid would be then presented to us for approval at the January 12th, 2021 board meeting. So are there any questions about that?
Yes. Is the opening bid a market recommended amount, or is that established through some other way?
Walk
Phillips.
speedily.
Mr. Phillips is on his way.
Mr. Siegel, could you repeat that question?
Is the recommended opening bid something that's established by the market, or was there some other way that we arrived at the $100,000 start?
So between some internal discussions with our legal counsel and outside counsel, as well as talking with outside realtor, we felt it was best to set a minimum sales price of $100,000. Doesn't mean we can't accept a higher price. Yeah.
Okay.
So if there's no other questions, this will return for a vote at the November 24th, 2020 board meeting. The third item on the agenda is the Facilities Condition Assessment Report, not to be confused with the Facilities Functional Analysis Report, which we went through. This is the actual condition of the physical facilities. So we've talked about this ad nauseum pretty much the entire time I've been on the board to get an actual assessment of our facilities. We were doing it internally, or we thought we were doing it internally. Never seemed to get done, and so we eventually contracted with a third-party accruant, which I think has a proprietary system, a capital planning software, and they have come in and they've done a comprehensive analysis of all of the facilities, and rather than have me try to tell it to you, I think there's somebody here who's probably on my list here. Paul Brown from Accruent will now present the facilities condition assessment findings. Is Paul Brown here? Remotely?
I am here. Can you hear me?
There we go.
And I will share my screen. Give me just a second here. And let me know if you can see that.
Not yet.
One more button. Let's try that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I'm going to move fairly quickly through these slides. We've got a large amount of material to cover. My name is Paul Brown with Accruent Corporation. I'm a project director. The person who really did all the work is Andrew Daw. He was the project manager. He's also on the line with us this evening. And I'm going to move through the slides, and then we'll have some question and answer, and Andrew can help me field any questions. So the agenda, real quickly, we're going to talk about our methodology, the approach, how we do our work, and the results of the assessment, and then question and answer. My understanding is that you have a copy of the slide deck. If you don't, we'll be happy to get it into your hands. There is some appendices material as well as the slides that we're going to go through. So the facility condition assessment is a on-site visual observation process where we have teams of architectural, mechanical, electrical professionals who walked through your buildings and photo documented and took notes of everything they saw. They break down the building or the asset, because we also did some site assets for you, into their major component parts, illustrated here as architectural, mechanical, and electrical systems. This being a linear illustration of the process, so before we arrive on site, there's a process of gathering drawings and other information useful for the assessment. During the assessment, it's the on-site walkthrough process with an escort and talking to as many people as we can about the condition of your building, learning as much as we possibly can. And then after the on-site work, the same people that walk through the building are also doing the data entry, entering all of their observations into the software package. And we use 3 primary industry standards in our work, which helps contribute to the reliability of the data that we want you to know about. In particular, RS means, you may be familiar with, some of you, is a national database of construction cost data. And this is what we use for our valuations. It's embedded inside our software. And then we also rely on the Building Owners and Managers Association useful information for the life expectancy of systems. And all of our data is organized according to the ASTM Uniform @2 system of organization. The illustrations here, I realize you can't see the actual wording on them. They're just intended to illustrate these components of our work. talk just a second about our cost estimating. The valuation work we do is intended to represent a preliminary budget level of estimating. And I say represent because you can see that this definition is based on project definition level. Projects are defined by design work. We don't actually do design work, but what we do is we attempt to do our best to anticipate what we think those values will be when you get to the point where you actually are designing projects. So to talk a little bit more about the valuation process, as I mentioned, we use RS means. Again, the illustrations just show the RS means database inside our database. We also apply a specific location factor, which is also an RS means data point. So all of your values are geographically localized for your area. And then when our assessors have completed their work, essentially they've completed a valuation, which is at an installing contractor rate. That's what the term that RS means uses. The term a lot of us use would be subcontractor value. So we all know that subcontractor values are less than full project costs. So the next step that we go through is to apply an adjustment factor to get the value up to what will represent a full project cost. And we have a worksheet. We used to do that in conversations with your team in Rockford and comparing notes on past project expenses. We arrived at an adjustment factor of 1.5 as being an appropriate number to use. And we applied that across the entire database as an uplift, so to speak, to get those values up to an appropriate point. Just to continue a little further with some definitions before we get into the actual results. Some key terms. So current replacement value, CRV, is the sum total of all the systems in a building. I'm just going to quickly pull this screen over here. If this works, let me know if you can see that. Did that change? I don't know if you're seeing that or not, but
yeah, we're seeing it, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a peek into the database. This is where your data actually resides. This happens to be the Cherry Valley Elementary School. And this is what I'm scrolling through here is the list of systems in the Cherry Valley Elementary School. So all of those systems, when they get added up, become the total, what we call the current replacement value of the building. In this illustration, we've grouped those systems in just to illustrate the concept. So that's current replacement value. Then another key term we use is FCI, Facility Condition Index. It's a very simple ratio. It's the ratio of the sum of the needs to spend money, which we call requirements. So anything that you need a capital expenditure for over the next 5 years, that sum divided into the replacement value of the building is the FCI. So if you have a $10 million building and you have $1 million of anticipated needs over the next 5 years, then that would be a 1 divided into 10 or a 10% FCI. So a lower number generally indicates a better condition building. Real quickly, I'm also just going to touch on RI, and the important fact here is that the RI includes 10 years of needs, so it's a little bit broader range view into the future. So consequently, you're going to get a higher RI number than you are an FCI number. So FCI, again, is 5 years. RI is 10 years. FCI is really the common industry benchmark that you can use to compare yourselves with other institutions. We also categorize needs by priority, which is the time that the need is going to be to come on your radar screen. So priority ones do within 1 year, et cetera. And we also categorize them by the cause of the need to spend the money. The vast majority we usually see are in the life cycle category. They're simply beyond useful life and wearing out. But then we do apply categories for other causes for the need to spend money also. So a requirement is a need to spend money, and a requirement gets a priority and a category. We're going to move now and talk about the results. So we're really working with you, partnering with you to try to answer 4 questions. Understanding what we own, what are the needs of those facilities, how much is it going to cost, and strategically, what should be done first? What's the highest priority? In looking at the results for this project, we looked at 46 assets, 44 buildings and 2 stadiums of various types, a total of almost 5 million gross square feet, with the total replacement value, that's the CRV, of $1.7 billion. And of that, there was a 5-year FCI cost. That's the need to spend money over 5 years of $529 million is what we came up with. When you do the math, that means that you wind up with an FCI of a 0.32, which on this subjective scale, which is a widely accepted subjective indication of condition, that would put your overall portfolio squarely in the middle of the fair category. Looking a little more deeply into your data and the condition of your buildings, this is just one of several Excel file outputs ranked and sorted and categorized various ways that we provided. In this one, it's a stack ranking of the schools by FCI, so the indicator of condition, with the worst condition buildings at the top, the better ones at the bottom. The illustration is broken here just to get the top end and the lower end on the screen, but the full data file is available. In looking more deeply at 2 that were at the top of the list, the Eisenhower and I believe it's Roosevelt, we did a little deeper analysis on, and just summarize these in individual slides with some images of the schools. I'm not going to go through this entire list of all the needs to spend money in those schools, but you can see that Andrew's done a great job of identifying the values by the priority. So priority 1, there's a fairly small immediate need, but then within the 2-year range, a fairly substantial number in this particular building. The total value in this building being a 5-year need of 22.7 million divided into the replacement value gives the FCI for this individual building at a 0.51. So if you remember back to the subjective scale, that's at the upper end. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail just for sake of time. It's essentially the same analysis of the Roosevelt High School building, which has an FCI of a 0.48. And then this slide is just further data analysis Again, these reports have been provided under separate cover. In this particular instance, we organize the data by major system group. So for example, this is your fire protection needs on this line, your HVAC needs at the top, and then we organize them by priority and look for standout values that might explain some trends of the needs in your particular case in a little more detail. So we can see that there's a significant amount of HVAC equipment reaching the end of its useful life within the next couple of years. Then we went one more step and we ran 4 different scenarios looking at the future potential levels of funding and the resulting conditions that would result from those levels of funding. One strategy was to maintain your current FCI. Another was to fund at 2.5% of current replacement value. That's an accepted industry standard. Another would be to have the objective to improve your conditions or reduce your FCI. And finally, a specific funding value over the next 20 years. This graph illustrates those results with your starting FCI overall at the beginning, and then over the course of 20 years, the 4 different scenarios are illustrated. The FCI, the condition, is illustrated by the line. The dollar value spends are indicated by the vertical bars. And we can see that to maintain your buildings over 20 years, the annual funding would be about $54 million per year. If you were to fund at 2.5% per year, the funding would be less. It would be $42 million per year. And your condition almost maintains itself over the 20 years, but then there's a spike towards the end. Third scenario, if the objective is to improve your condition, drop the FCI, that would require annual spending of almost $68 million. And in the fourth scenario, a randomly selected number of $25 million per year, we can see that that results in an increasing FCI or a deterioration in the condition of your buildings. And then we also ran those same scenarios again, exactly the same with an inflation factor. These numbers are available in our report. And in the interest of time, that's the end of our slideshow, and we'll take any questions you have.
Well, I had a couple of quick questions, and then what I'm going to maybe suggest is if Mr. Phillips is able to speak to these issues, whether, and I don't mean now, I mean whether we can maybe bring this back, since this is the first time the board's seen this. And this, I mean, these are all really big numbers, but that's actually sort of my question. So if you look at the categories on slide 20, HVAC, you're saying we need to spend within 5 years $200 million on HVAC systems. First, I wasn't aware we had $200 million worth of HVAC systems in our district, but we just did a $270 million facilities plan, which in fact, I thought, upgraded many of the HVAC systems. So can you talk about, can you just give me some indication of like what we're talking about there? What needs to be done to the HVAC systems throughout the district?
Yeah, I'll take a swipe at that first and then ask Andrew if he wants to add anything. Yes, there certainly were many HVAC systems that were upgraded, but you know, it's expensive, and you do have a lot of value in your HVAC systems in these buildings, and this is the value that we see coming due. Now, does that mean that you have to do all of this in 2 years? No, you probably don't, because strategically, you know, you can continue to change belts and lubricate, you know, fan bearings and whatnot, and continue to extend the useful life. But Andrew, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. As mentioned previously in the slide deck, everything does have a life cycle to it or age associated with it. So when we look at HVAC, those are usually the big ticket items and that contribute to this total here. We're talking boilers, chillers, ductwork, control systems, anything that would really fall under those HVAC systems. Now, those aren't cheap items, especially if we're talking 6 air handlers on a rooftop, multiple boilers, multiple chillers, and in fact, the distribution itself that goes through these buildings as well. But yeah, again, kind of going back, do we need to do all these within a set time period? Not necessarily. Some of those years can be extended out based on routine maintenance, but eventually everything has a life cycle, and when we see the age of deterioration approach those certain life cycles, those are when we get more issues associated with those specific systems and resulting more towards failure of those items.
And I'll just continue with that a little bit. I just picked this one building, just take a look at this again. It's the Cherry Valley Elementary School. It's got 3 fairly large air handling units on the roof. This is one of them. This is the image of the unit. It's valued at $155,000 for a full replacement, but these are not inexpensive items.
Yeah, I understand that, but I know we also just spent a bunch of money on some of this, and we put in a lot of new boilers. I know that for a fact. So I'm just a little surprised at the number. I'll cede to anybody else, though, that wants to ask specific questions while we've got these individuals available. Is there anyone that wants to ask any questions?
No, I think the information is very helpful, and the ranking of priorities, I think, helps the board a lot to try to figure out what has to be done, and we will have to listen to our experts internally as well on what are the priorities going to be. And I'll just say that we've been this route before, and by ignoring our buildings for decades, that's what caused the mess we got into before. And so I guess the takeaway is, if you don't want to get into that mess again, you're going to have to annually fund capital dollars for maintaining our buildings.
Ken, this is Jude. I have a question.
Go ahead, Jude.
So with regard to making recommendations, I know you said we have internal, but this report, is that the end of the work that we have with this company, or do they help us make some decisions or make recommendations as to where to go?
So
Philip is going to head up too. So.
Ms. McCulloch, the work that we contracted with Accruent, that is finished up, but we do have a 3-year contract utilizing their VFA software, which allows us to do a lot of modeling, estimating with the information they provided. We also have the opportunity, as we replace systems, whether that be a roof or an HVAC system, we can update that within the software itself. So it's really truly a living, breathing document. At the end of the 3 years, we can decide to move forward again with another 3-year contract, or the Accruent will provide us a CSV file with this information that could be uploaded to another software program.
Jude, are you on mute?
Jude, I think you're...
Sorry, I did mute. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. To finish answering that question, though, is who will the district work with to actually make recommendations? And obviously, there's going to be a financial component with this. Somebody's going to have to figure out how where the money would come from and how much is available. Certainly, what was it, $24 million just to status quo a year?
Right.
So that is.
This information is going to be instrumental as we move into our next facilities master plan. This information, along with our functional building analysis, so we can not only assess how our buildings are functioning, but also how they're being used, the usage of our buildings. So taking a holistic picture of the district at a building by building level. So to answer your question, the next phase would be to engage an architectural A&E team for a facilities master plan.
Which we don't have one going for another year at least. I'm assuming you're going to start work on that before we work on our next 5-year plan or 10-year plan, whatever we're going to do next.
So as part of this facilities condition assessment, we, if you remember correctly, we just finished our decennial life safety survey. Those projects were included in this facilities condition assessment. So yes, we've already started on the items with our life safety that were due within 1 year. We also have a number of projects that are due within 5 years. So we will continue to move forward, and I believe Ms. Yar is up next with a recommendation on a 5-year spending plan, that some of this would be included.
Thank you.
Okay,
Hey, I've got a question.
go ahead. Mike,
So-
Mike Connor.
Yeah, 2 questions. So one, if I heard Mr. Rollins correctly, was there an implied timing on follow-up on this? So is this coming back to us at a certain point? What would be the next steps?
I had suggested, because we're running pretty long, and I'm not sure I'm going to get through my agenda at this point, that rather than open it up for everybody to ask questions now, that we do bring this back with Mr. Phillips available to ask more detailed questions. Because I am going to have to cut this off because we're not going to get through my agenda. I'm not even sure we're getting through my agenda at this point. So
Okay.
let's just say that we'll bring this back at some future board meeting, and it's not particularly time sensitive. Just to have Mr. Phillips available to ask more detailed, some of the more detailed questions now that we've gotten kind of the overview report.
Okay, the second question then is, will we have the ability to formulate questions and send it to accruant, if I heard you correctly, say on the HVAC systems, and what seems to be a difference between the assessment and what we feel we put in? So will that be a real process that we can follow so we can get more details?
Well, I'm going to assume that Mr. Phillips has all this background data. We don't have the full report from accruant. We don't have all the spreadsheets. He has that all. So I think we'll be able to specifically, and frankly, I am going to ask him on the HVAC systems, like where are we looking to have to put in this kind of money, given the fact that we just did a facilities plan and bought a bunch of new boilers and built a couple of new buildings. But I think he's got the information that he should be able to answer that question. And, you know, if he can't answer it, I'm sure he can reach out to accruant then.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to slide into this, and this relates exactly to what Mr. Scrivano was talking about. How do we pay for everything? So the next item on the agenda is a multi-year spending plan. And Ms. Yar is come up with, and there's a PowerPoint presentation on this, a 5-year spending plan. I always, look a little bit askance at 5-year spending plans, especially in our area, because we really have no control over our revenue, right? That's pretty much almost all the state. So we're going to have to make some assumptions here. Hopefully you've all at least taken a glance at this. In slide 3, she's got a 5-year spending plan by department. And she's, done this based on input from other people in the administration. Slide 4 includes some specific things that is included in the plan. Slide 5 is things that are not included and that we need to do a PDSA on, including the basement remodel and the first floor remodel of this building. So then let's look at the revenue outlook. So slide 7, if anybody's got a crystal ball, feel free to let us know what's going to happen with evidence-based funding. So what she's showing here is flat through 2022, because we're just guessing that based on the pandemic that we're really not going to see increases in funding, at least for a year or two. And then she's showing a 5% annual increase after that, and whether that actually happens, who knows. Next slide is CPPRT, same thing, where you can see that we've seen a huge decline in CPPRT, again, directly related to the pandemic. She's showing a modest comeback from that. That might come back more quickly, who knows? You know, it just depends on, you know, how quickly business recovers from all of this. So then she's showing on slide 10 a 5-year projection of operating funds. She's showing the fund balance. Now, you'll recall that Mrs. McCulloch had indicated that we are currently significantly above what we said is our policy for our reserve. And if you were feeling good about that, you can look at Ms. Yar's slide and see that over the 5 years, that pretty much disappears, potentially. And then that gets us to the capital, which is what we were just talking about. Multi-year capital life safety revenue and expenditures. Ms. Yar is showing, you know, what she's projecting for capital expenditures during that period. In the next slide of 14, she's showing capital needs funding not secured. And then she gets to the question on slide 15, so how do we fund it? So there's only a limited number of ways we can fund these capital needs. And one is we increase our property taxes, which then puts pressure on the tax rate. Another is a facility sales tax. So the state of Illinois, I don't know how many years ago it was at this point, it's 7 or 8 years ago, the state of Illinois added legislation allowing school districts on a county basis, not a school district basis. It has to be done on a county by county basis. All of the school districts in the county represent, and enough school districts who have more than 50% of the students in the county have to vote to put a referendum on the ballot for an up to 1% sales tax that is supposed to be used strictly for facilities. And at this point, and there's a slide later in the deck that shows at this point over half the counties in Illinois have passed that referendum. And most of the other counties have at least tried to pass the referendum, and we are one of the few counties that hasn't even tried to pass that referendum. Ms. Yar doesn't have it on her slide, but another possibility would be a state capital plan. I think she's correct not to include it on the slide because I don't think there's much chance of that happening. There are life safety bonds, which we can do without a referendum, but that's a limited number of dollars every year and is limited to specifically things that are on our life safety list. And then the only other thing that we could do would be, she's referring to it here as issue debt, which is to do what it would take a referendum, do what we did, I can't even remember how many years ago now, 2011, 2012, do a referendum and try to get people to pass that referendum to allow us to issue bonds. And then those bonds are paid for, again, with real estate taxes. So that, again, puts pressure on our real estate tax rate. And the only other source of funding is our annual operating budget. So, you know, we just went through a lot of really big dollars. And as Mr. Scrivano indicated, the way our facilities got in the shape they are right now is because nobody spent those dollars over the years. And so our job is going to be to try to figure out what we have to fund and where that money is going to come from. So that's going to slide into, and actually part of this presentation actually relates to what's next on the budget, which is the 2020 tax levy. What was on the in the slide deck is not quite correct. I think we're going to change that. So the options are, as you recall, when we do the tax levy, we can, without a referendum, increase our levy by up to CPI. And then in addition to taking CPI, we can what they call take new property, which is above and beyond CPI. And that's the new property that's been added to the tax rolls since the last over the past year. What we have done consistently in the district for the past 7 or 8 years is to do neither, to keep our actual levy flat so that we levy the same number of dollars from one year to the next. And as EAV has grown then, that has then started bringing our rate back down so that our rate is projected to be about what it was about 9 years ago, when it started going up. What the administration is asking us to consider this year is to take new property, so that we would not take CPI, but we would take new property, which would increase the levy by a little over $700,000. So the options for the board are, if you don't do that, the rate will go down even more, a little bit. If you do it, the rate still goes down because our EAV is growing, at least right now it's still growing. But we will have increased our levy. I can just say it's been a nice story for us to tell people we haven't increased our levy in 10 years or 8 years or 9 years, however long it's been. I think it's actually been 10 years that we haven't increased our levy. If we take the new property, it becomes a slightly different soundbite, a little harder story to tell, because you can't say we just kept our levy flat. You have to say, well, we didn't take CPI, but we took new property. The question is, this is what we're here for. This is what we're getting paid for, right? We've got these funding needs, and we've also got an obligation to the community to try to keep our tax rate down as low as possible while still meeting all our funding needs. So this is the conversation we actually have to have tonight, because we're going to be ending up voting on the tax levy, I think, fairly soon, potentially even at the next board meeting. Yep, this will return for a vote at the November 10th, 2020 board meeting, which is item D, the levy resolution. So we need to give the administration some indication of what we want to do here.
Question, Ken? This is Jude.
Mr. Siegel?
No, go ahead, Jude.
Go ahead, Jude.
We just.
Oh, no, that's fine. You just gave us new property, and I'm wondering, does somebody give us also what we would gain if we took the CPI? I see the 2.3%.
I thought that was on, I just lost mine. I think that's
I'm looking. Where is it?
on one of the slides.
Slide 10.
Slide 17.
Thank you, Mike. 17.
There is no 17, slide 10.
I only go 15.
Which one are you looking at? Because I'm on 17.
Oh, I'm looking at whatever was attached to board docs.
For which?
Yeah, that's fine.
Which one?
Well, you know what?
This is on board docs.
Well, Connor, can you put 17 up for us on the screen?
Now, I'm not talking about what's attached to the tax levy. I'm talking about what's attached to the multi-year funding, which is why I said these conversations run into each other.
Oh, okay.
Year funding PDF, PowerPoint presentation starts talking about the tax levy 2020 scenarios at about slide 17.
All right.
That's the one I have up. I'm on 17 of 31 slides, and on 17, it gives
All
the
right.
scenario.
Well, I went to the tax levy slide deck, so sorry. So when you say $12 million of new property, that's how much new property we would be taxing on to get the $700,000?
Correct.
Okay, so now I'm trying to go back to that other slide deck. 17.
What they're really showing here, that top line, is that our current capped funds, the difference between the capped funds and the non-capped funds is the non-capped funds is our debt service. And so that's just whatever number it is that we need to pay the bonds. It's the capped funds really that we're talking about. So you'll see last year it looks like we levied $141,351,895. So if you do nothing, if we don't increase at all, that's what it would be. The levy ordinance, or the levy resolution that we adopt would be to levy $141,351,895. If you levied with no CPI, but levied against new property separately, that would get you up about $700,000 to the $142,082,161. If you took, well, that's not actually. The mistake is in the total rate at the bottom. Just ignore those numbers on the bottom row, because those turn out not to be right. if we took CPI with no new property, the levy would go up to 144.6 million. And then if we took the CPI and the new property, we'd be levying 145,350.
So, but based on what you gave us on buildings, that does hardly cracks a dent if we're
No, I mean,
4 million.
this isn't going to make a material difference.
Do you have the numbers there somewhere for if we were to take the 0.5%, for example, tax?
I don't. I mean, I was talking to somebody who was kind of pegging it at maybe 9 million if we took a 0.5 cent. I mean, some of this information is a little stale. You know, we sort of floated a trial balloon a few years ago, and when we did that, a 1% sales tax would have generated like 18 to 19 million, something like that.
Okay. David, I interrupted you. Thank you for letting me do so.
For Jude and Mike's benefit, I just want to say we've lost internet connection, and we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Just as well.
So if you do have a question, you are going to have to say something, because you can wave your hand all you want, but we can't see you. There you go. Mr. Siegel, did you have a question? Your light was on before.
Yeah, I guess since we had to have this conversation tonight, I'm going to ask just how nice of a talking point has it really been that we've kept our levy flat for the last 9-10 years? Especially this year, I continue to get a lot of flack about the tax rate and about how egregious the impact of the schools on our tax rate, whether it's actually realistic or fair or not. It was particularly bad when we shut down in the spring, and I got all these emails from people saying, "Where's my refund? Where's my prorated refund?"
Right, yeah.
I don't think, at least from what I hear, and I hear a fair bit, that having kept the levy flat for the last 9 years means anything. But likewise, I don't hear a lot of people saying, "Wow, this is really great. EAV is on the rise." Until someone's selling his house. I guess I'm not ready to go whole hog and take everything if we don't need it. But I'm wondering just how negative of an impact it's going to be to take at least new property. Obviously, we'll take it at some point. I guess ride something of a strong area market and try and get a few extra dollars out of that.
I guess my thought, Tim, is that I think the sales tax would be a hard sell, but I think taking CPI into property, I'd be okay with it.
I guess I'll push back a little, because I think it has been a pretty good selling point for us to say that we've kept our levy flat. I've used that line quite a bit. But what I tell people is, can you show me another government body that hasn't raised your taxes in 10 years? And the real issue that we've got here is that everybody, or one of the issues I should say, one of the real issues we have is that all of the other taxing bodies look to us. And as soon as we raise our levy, that gives them cover to raise their levy.
Just to interject, I do think Mr. Siegel, you referenced what I think has been the most positive impact, and that is the impact on the real estate market and values going up pretty substantially. I think we may see them even in a pandemic, which has had many negative effects on the economy. That's been indisputable. For whatever reason, our real estate market still seems to be strong right now, and I think that slide on when we do go ahead and move on to the next item, that slide number 5, that equalizes S value chart from 2008, where we see it fall all the way down from 2.85 billion down to 1.96 billion, and then subsequently seeing it go up 20% is certainly the board's leadership, along with the other taxing bodies, certainly contributed to this strong real estate market that, and it's not where we want it to be, but it certainly is a strong recovery compared to some other areas of the economy.
Well, I don't know, we don't necessarily have to come to a decision tonight. Just people need to be thinking about it and know that there's going to be a vote on it at the next board meeting. So why don't we leave it at that? And
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I'm out of time, but I'm going to keep going anyway.
Got 12 minutes.
Thanks. All right, so that brings us to the 2020 resolution to abate property tax levy. This is not a long discussion. For those of you who've been on the board for a while, we did these QS, qualified school construction bonds, and as part of that, every year we have to do a resolution to abate the property tax levy. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This is just part of the deal of doing those QSCB bonds. So this will return for a vote at the November 10th, 2020 board meeting. And that brings us to PDSA Tier 3, Reading Horizons. So let's see, this is another one of the academic return on investment. Let me get to the right PowerPoint here. And this one is a Tier 3 AROI project on Reading Horizons. And we've got a PowerPoint presentation that you can pull up on that. And that's not it. Just a second. All right. So this is similar in sort of construct to what I went through on the last PDSA or AROI on the Tier 3. If you look at, so Reading Horizons, just as a background, is the program that we use to teach literacy to kindergarten, first, and second graders. And the IAR, the state standardized test, does not start until third grade. And so this is supposed to look at whether or not we're getting our bang for our buck, our academic return on investment, from this Reading Horizons program. And so I'm trying to see something that I want to. You look at the. So improved literacy on slide 8, which is number 1 here. The standards that they've focused on are students demonstrate capability of decoding text and mastery of grade level phonics and phonemic awareness and competencies, as measured by 60% of students scoring approaching or meeting on the Reading Horizons spelling and word recognition. And then 2 is staff training. 95% of first-year implementation teachers attend a minimum of a 2-day initial training. 3 is again staff training. 95% of teachers will complete a minimum of 2 coaching sessions per year. 4, 80% of teachers observed will demonstrate fidelity of implementation of Reading Horizons as measured by meeting 80% of observation and coaching checklist items. There's an internal standard year-to-year comparison. And then they've got, their implementation guidelines. Startup costs are on page 18. This is, $1.5 million for total startup costs. The annual total cost, maintenance cost on slide 19 is $842,500,000. And then I guess Ms. Detman is available, and so if anybody has any questions, I think probably this would work best if you just ask your questions. And actually, I hope Ms. Detman's still available. We can't see you. Are you still available, Ms. Detman?
I'm here, yes.
Okay, so Ms. Detman is in fact available if anybody wants to ask any questions.
Well, I'll just ask one. We always want to be able to answer the question, how do we know this is working? And, do we have anything to compare where Reading Horizons is in a classroom to any classrooms that aren't using Reading Horizons? so that we know that this is the right tool that's driving literacy improvement. So I don't know if that's kind of a general question.
Mr. Scrivano, we chose the internal standard because we don't have a similar comparison group in our district. The classrooms where we're not using Reading Horizons are in our TBE classrooms or special programs, so they don't give us a one-to-one comparison.
I see, okay.
This is Jude.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jude.
The only classrooms in the district not using it with Fidelity, or whatever we're going to call Fidelity, we'll be back there in a minute, are the ones with special programs and TBI. That is not my understanding, so please clarify.
We have Reading Horizons in all district classrooms, kindergarten, first and second, with the exception of our TBE classrooms that use Benchmark and classrooms in Montessori and Marshall.
Okay, so we have it available in all those classrooms. That doesn't mean we're using it in all those classrooms. Would that be correct, Ms. Detman?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
We have the resource available for teachers in all those classrooms, but that does not mean they're using it as part of their day-to-day teaching. We do not have the information, or you probably know across the district what percentage of classrooms with whom we've provided this are actually utilizing it.
Well, it is the core curriculum in all of our gen ed classes, kindergarten, first and second grade, but we do not teach the program in TBE classrooms. They use Benchmark, and we don't teach it in Montessori or Marshall. All other classrooms, it is the core foundational literacy curriculum.
If I could interject, Mrs. Detman, I think Mrs. McCulloch is referring to something, referring to slide 11. One of the reasons we're measuring fidelity of implementation is because there are some concerns about it being faithfully implemented, even though it is the curriculum, and that's part of why we're measuring that. I think that's what Mrs. McCulloch is getting at. Is that correct, Mrs. McCulloch?
Sure is.
Thank you.
A little bit more on fidelity of implementation. You said that there's a rubric for that. I mean, we can, I don't know, Tim, if we have enough time here for this, but it is, I'm just going to make a statement that just as we've seen with the integrated math that I spoke of earlier, and how well we're doing across the district, we can't say that that's being implemented in all the classrooms. In fact, all the teachers who are supposed to be teaching integrated math have not gone through the professional development to put that into place. So I don't know what percentage of our teachers who have already attended PD to implement the Reading Horizons, and part of this is coaching, how many have had coaching, but I think that is all part of that. In terms of fidelity, you said 80%. What does 80% mean? Does that mean they can still use some of their teaching methods as part of it, and they're just using it 80% of the time? I mean, there's so many questions. My understanding is it has to be used, it's built on day by day. What do you do with classrooms like we have students who aren't showing up day after day after day? How do you catch them up when it's built on the day before? So the measurement, your metrics on this, I understand why we're not doing a lot of achievement, but I think that we're going to have difficulty even gaining knowledge about the fidelity of its implementation. But I hope we do.
We may have lost your audio.
Mine?
No, you're still there.
You're still there.
That's coming in hardwired. He's just resetting the Wi-Fi. So we have internet, hardwired.
Does that mean my comments you didn't hear them?
No, we did. But
we heard.
Oh, yeah, everybody's like, no, don't say anything more. Go ahead.
our screen just went completely blank. We did have some icons up, but the screen just went completely blue, so we weren't sure what was going on.
Yeah, okay.
I guess I'd just like to ask a follow-up question to what I think Mrs. McCulloch was asking. If we know there are classrooms that may not be implementing it with fidelity, do we get any information, or do we have access to information with Reading Horizons that can show a difference? If there's any difference in results between those classrooms and the ones where we think that it is being implemented with fidelity?
That'll be part of our study. This is Heidi. That'll be part of our study in implementation and monitoring that data. Is we'd like to segment student results by levels of implementation, as demonstrated by the coaching and observation checklist. So those teachers that are exceeding 80% of those items, we'll segment data so that we can make those correlations between teacher implementation and impact on student results.
One thing we'll see with both Tier 3 assessments that we're doing, to build on what Mrs. Detman is saying, is first we have to put this in real layperson terms so I can understand it. What we're really saying is, are we doing it? And once we've measured, are we doing it, then we can subdivide the results of the students where we feel like we are doing it faithfully against the ones that aren't doing it faithfully with common groups, and we can look, you know, which groups of students is this working. So I think whether it's the Freshman Academy or Reading Horizons, we've got to build in metrics to make sure we're measuring, are we actually doing this correctly before we can evaluate the effectiveness of the program. So I think you're going to see that with both of our Tier 3s. And to make it into a larger conversation, that is why, in addition to the scorecard, we are developing a standards of practice component to our evaluation system, because what we're seeing time and time again, I think we're going to continue this conversation next Tuesday, whether it's those academic positions that we've created or whether it's programs that we invest in, if we don't do them faithfully, it becomes difficult to determine whether it's a bad investment in the position or the program, or whether it's just we're not doing it right. And so what a lot of our work is going to be moving forward is going to be to make sure anything we implement, we make sure A, we evaluate, are we doing it correctly, and B, if we're doing it correctly, does it work? Does that make sense to everybody? So that's really why Mrs. Detman and the team have built these. If you look, really 3 of the 4 measurements are really dedicated to, are we doing it correctly? And I know that's a step back in a program that we've been doing for 3 years, but we have to be honest about where we are in implementation right now. And I think we have some good metrics that will serve as a good measurement of whether we are actually getting the proper training and doing the work on the front end. Then we can truly make the big decision about whether this is the right program for RPS. But that consistently is a challenge in a district our size. That's not unique to RPS or anything along those lines. I think when you get into a large district, that can be part of the challenge you work with, is whether people are actually doing the work as it's supposed to be done or laid out. So
Ken, this is Jude. Can I just say that it was I was part of the Ed committee when this came through, and it was a collaborative effort with the teachers. They were all over this. And the pilot program, all the teachers spoke highly, had what they represented to us were good results. Otherwise, we wouldn't have expanded it to the district. So, and I also understand, I remember from that time, and I know now that there are internal metrics as to how it's being implemented by teachers throughout the district. So we should be able to pull up any sort of information about who's using it and who is not using it. I think that answers your question, Tim. I have a final question. So when you say a 5-year part, this is about the money part, startup costs, that I was just going to say to you, we've been in it 3 years already. What does this mean, a 5-year startup cost? Are we starting all over with these people for the $1.5 million of startup costs? And then on top of that is 842 because somebody talked to the money.
Mrs. McCulloch, this is the all-in cost, so it's not new cost here. This is us representing the total cost of the program. Am I correct? I've got the content experts in the room. They're nodding yes.
Yes, and the 5-year that you see there, Ms. McCulloch, is the 5-year agreement that we entered into when we bought the program.
So we have 2 years left on that, and this year's annual cost for that is 842. Is that correct?
That's the all-in costs, including employee time for coaching and training, yes.
Right, and I see that and I understand that, and again, in addition to whatever metrics there are internally that you could pull up to see that people are using up, they can tell how much time they're getting coached. So I'm done, sorry.
Okay, yeah, due to the time, we're going to roll questions over to our next board meeting on Reading Horizons.
All right, so we'll bring this back and we can talk about more.
If you want to talk about your consent items, Tim?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So first consent item is Tier 1 PDSA, Music First. Music First curriculum bundle will provide secondary fine arts a common digital instruction resource. If anyone has questions about that, you need to ask an administrator.
Okay.
Number 2, Tier 1 PDSA, Learning Ally. Learning Ally will provide accessible reading material for qualified students who struggle with reading because of a learning disability, limited English proficiency, or hearing impairments. Learning Ally will provide over 83,000 novels narrated by real people, and more titles are added regularly. Number 3, Tier 1 PDSA, Rock Valley College senior semester tuition. Administration is recommending that the district pay tuition for up to 20 qualifying students to attend the second semester of their senior year on campus at RVC. This is for students interested in continuing on to the RVC NIU engineering program. Are there any questions or discussion on these consent items? Seeing none, hearing none.
Thank you.
There are no consent items to be presented on the consent agenda for the November 24th, 2020 board meeting. Those must have been for the November 10th, 2020 board meeting. Yep, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So
And
now-
that completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you. All right, we now on to internal, external stakeholders. Mr. Siegel and Mr. Dotson will present these items.
Thank you very kindly, and if nobody minds, I'm going to change the order on the agenda a little bit and just start with the student attendance boundary realignment. Then we'll go on to lobbyists and Speakers Bureau. Is that okay?
Yep.
No? Oh. Mr. Phillips will be able to help out, I'm sure. Fortunately, we're probably going to make up a little bit of time here, get something of an abbreviated report. The administration is recommending to the board to approve RSP Associates boundary realignment and feeder system recommendations. The recommended changes will be implemented, if approved, in preparation of the 2021-22 academic year. At the October Committee of the Whole, RSP Associates, the district's demographer, presented findings from the district-wide building utilization analysis. The big thing that we're going to focus on is there were 4 schools that they found operating above 95% of their functional capacity, including one that was well over. There were 3 elementary schools, Brookview, Riverdale, and Westview, and then 1 middle school, RISA, operating at 109.4% of capacity. RSP Associates was hired as an independent third party to prepare an analysis, a building utilization analysis, and to provide recommendations to alleviate these capacity issues. The following best planning practices were considered when developing the recommendations: considering walkability where practical, have contiguous attendance areas, in avoiding islands, minimize the number of splitting the feeder from elementary to middle school, and I think that this is a really important element of this analysis. Factoring in educational programming and student assignments, keeping as many students as possible in the current elementary and middle school attendance areas with the constraints of building capacity, future enrollment, and building location. Utilizing transportation network and other natural and man-made features to create logical attendance areas, and minimize creating potential negative transportation situations. I guess we're not going to have RSP Associates here tonight, but we do have Mr. Phillips, who will be happy to go through this report.
So we'll jump right into the elementary boundary realignment recommendations. As Mr. Siegel had mentioned, through the functional building analysis, RSP identified 3 elementary schools, Brookview, Riverdale, and Westview, that were operating above the 95% functional capacity threshold. So after working with our schools team, Ms. Detman's team in curriculum, and also in discussions with transportation, the following boundary changes are being recommended. So for Brookview, we're actually, and if you can see it now, I'm on the boundary change map. Brookview will move to there will be students that reside within Brookview, and that boundary will change and go to Gregory. Riverdale will split to 3 different elementary schools. There will be a section of folks that go to Constance Lane, a section of folks below Route 20 between the river and 11th Street that will go to Froberg, and lastly a group that will go to Lathrop. And at Westview, we'll move the boundary above Riverside, and those students will move on to Conklin. So I think I'll move to slide 10. The important piece is really realizing what students will be impacted by the boundary changes. So if you look down the left-hand column, those are the current reside schools where our students are located at. Across the top of the slide, that is the recommended schools that the students would move to, and then the number of students affected. So a couple things I want to point out. This is based off of our 2019-2020 enrollment numbers, as we don't have the current numbers for 2021 finalized. This also takes into account removing our TBE program, special programming, as well as Kappa. So at Brookview, there are 53 students that currently reside in the Brookview boundaries that would move to Gregory. If you move down to Riverdale, which is number 15, there's 77 that currently reside within Riverdale that would move to Constance Lane, 5 that would move to Froberg, and 12 students that would potentially move to Lathrop. And then lastly, if we move down to line 20, at Westview, we have 41 students that currently reside in the Westview boundary. After that change, we have 41 students that move to Conklin. And as I stated, that is above Riverside Drive. So then if we move to the middle school, our RISA was the middle school that's operating above the 95% threshold. But in order to make the change, we're actually creating some movement in 3 middle schools. And I think I'll just move to the students' impact slide, because that really gives the best look. So once again, current reside is down the left-hand side of the column. Across the top is the recommended reside. So we have 153 students that are currently residing in the Flynn boundary. After the recommended changes, those 153 would move to Lincoln, and then 91 would move to RISA. If we go down to line 26, which is RISA, there's 233 students currently that reside within the RISA boundary that would move to Flynn. And lastly, we have 61 students that would move from RISA to Lincoln. So that total of 538 students impacted across that change. Then if we take a look at the feeder systems, with these changes, some of the elementary schools would change with how they feed up. So if we look at the feeders going into Jefferson, Froberg, Riverdale will move into that. Froberg, it will also stay apart as a feeder to Jefferson, but will feed through Flynn. Riverdale will feed through the RISA Middle School. Rolling Green will also change and will feed through up to Lincoln. And then as you notice, you'll see an arrow from Lincoln to Jefferson and then to East. Due to East's current capacity, The group of students that would move from Riverdale into the Constance Lane boundary would then move from Lincoln to Jefferson is the recommendation by RSP. So lastly, next, if we move the next steps, if the board does approve the recommended boundary changes, RSP will update our web address locator, update the address lookup table, and then provide new elementary and middle school maps. Take any questions?
I think we got, I have questions about Lincoln. Lincoln, so basically what's going to happen, if I understand this properly, you're going to split, well, Lincoln is going to gain Rolling Green, right?
Correct.
And so, I guess I don't understand how the split from Lincoln to Jefferson and East is. Could you go over that one more time?
Yeah, so the change with basically it's driven by the Riverdale change.
Okay.
With that group of students south of 15th that will go to Constance Lane, and typically Constance Lane feeds into East.
Right.
But due to capacity at East, that group of students would typically, had they stayed within Riverdale, would have filtered up through the middle school at Flynn and then on to Jefferson. And that's, RSP is recommending they continue.
Do we know what that number would be? How many students would be affected by that?
I can get that number for you.
So basically, my question comes down to those families that live in the Bloom, Johnson, Rolling Green area would pretty much still go to East.
Correct.
From Lincoln.
Correct.
And it would only be the ones from Lincoln going to Jefferson would be south of 15th Street in Kishwaukee area, somewhere over there.
Correct. Okay. But I can get you that exact number,
Yeah.
Mr. Scrivano.
More questions? You can tell who's got Mr. Rollins.
So one question is, so what's the implementation? Are we going to grandfather in kids who are currently in the school, and are we going to grandfather in siblings? Because those are the questions that always come up in these situations.
At this point, there's been no discussion with the team about doing any grandfathering with this move.
So you would force kids to move schools immediately?
That has been our discussion at this time.
When is this up for a vote?
I believe it comes back to the 10th.
Yep.
Okay, I mean, that's really hard on families and kids to move, from and we're going to hear about it.
Yep.
Make sure we talk about it.
Yep.
So Ken, this is
Go ahead,
Jude.
Go ahead, Jude.
I'm with Tim. We've done these boundary changes before, and we've typically actually even grandfathered siblings at certain times, but certainly left the students stay where they're at until they move on to their next level. So if it's elementary, until they go to middle and the like. Have we looked at what those numbers will be like if we allow that to happen? I mean, how many families are impacted, and can we accommodate that?
We have not, at this time, Ms. McCulloch, we have not looked at what those numbers would look like if we grandfathered. We can definitely work with RSP to get those numbers.
With the middle schools, as a ballpark, I mean, obviously this is not going to be accurate 100%, but I think you can assume that if you only do this change with incoming sixth graders, then you get about a third of the relief. I mean, just assuming that would be assuming the distribution is equal. When you look at elementary, you would get about 1/6 of the relief that we're proposing here. So the downside to the grandfathering is that you mitigate the impact pretty significantly in terms of the pressure relief for the overcrowding. conversely, I agree with the board that this is always very politically challenging to move students in the middle of their sequence at an elementary or at or middle school experience. So we will certainly continue that conversation as an administrative team prior to the next discussion and review those scenarios.
Well, I'll tell you, from my perspective, I won't be willing to vote on it until you have that full component of information, because we talk about how mobility impacts achievement already. Now, maybe it's different because of the pandemic and the blended and the remote and all those sort of things, but community and staying with a group through a school seems to, you guys have brought us information that is an important part of achievement. And so saying that you're going to move kids, and I'd love to say, great, we're implementing the same programs all across the district. So in the elementary school especially, it shouldn't make any difference. If they were doing Reading Horizons here, they're going to be doing it there. But I'm going to say with great belief that it is not being implemented at the same level across the district in all the elementary schools. So no, they're not going to be getting the same education just by changing schools. That is a goal we have, but we're not there.
Make a statement. This, the recommendation is in regards to the boundary changes. Your existing board policy regarding grandfathering and other policy statements, there is no recommendation for change with that. It's right now the boundary changes itself, and I think Mr. Siegel, although I'll probably be stealing his thunder here, is going to recommend a board listening session as part of your speaking engagements to see what the general sentiment is regarding grandfathering of students and the impact on these boundary changes.
And I think we all understand that, we have buildings that are way at or near capacity in Riverdale, for example, or, whatever. So we know we've got to make some changes, but the reality is that it's challenging for families to make those kinds of moves in the middle of a period of time, I guess. Go ahead, Mr. Rollins, you have another?
And the other thing is not really a question, it's just a comment. So this is what happens when you've got board members who've been on for a long time. We went through this once, and then within a couple of years we were being asked to change boundaries again because somebody had miscalculated. So I'm just going to say I really don't want that to happen again this time. So I think what happened last time is somebody miscalculated the amount of growth in the southeast. And so all of a sudden our southeast schools were bursting at the seams, even though we had just redistricted. So I'm just asking the administration we use the same outfit, I've mentioned that a couple of times, the same demographers, hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they are actually looking out and giving us their best estimate as to what things are going to look like in 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Siegel.
Not 100% ready to unleash the thunder that Ms. Hoadley had referred to.
Okay.
But there will be future discussion that right now data is being collected to see the workability of it, the number of students impacted, to come up with something called a sister school concept, which we believe is going to relieve a lot of the pressure on redistricting or drawing new boundaries. So I promise you it'll be exciting, but I'm not prepared to give it to you tonight.
Okay.
So this is Jude, may I ask a question then?
Sure, go ahead.
So if this sister school piece and if this talking to people about their changes and all isn't coming until after we take the vote, we don't have enough input from our community and constituents, I think, to make a good decision. Is there a rush to do this next week? Or can we at least have further conversation before you put this as an action item? I would like to see it moved out until we hear the rest of Mr. Siegel's thunder, and until we know how we're going to get our input from, I mean, if we do not grandfather, which I could grandfather siblings, which I could come along with as a compromise. Let's just look at the kids that are still in the schools. But if they have siblings that are coming along who will come in at a different school, it's very likely that parents will want them both to go together. I mean, that's a possibility. So the impact on numbers might be even less with that. But if I think we need more information, I don't know that we'll have it all by next week, but you can let us know.
I would just add that I don't want to speak for the group, and Dr. Vosberg could weigh in or Mrs. Hoadley, but I think making a decision about the boundaries first and foremost, irrespective of what we're going to do with grandfathering other topics, I think is our preference, so that we can sooner rather than later start that going. I think no matter what, I think what the administration is saying is we do need to address these unequal boundaries. I think the ongoing conversation would be exactly where the board took it today, which is at what rate of change would we want to recommend? Dr. Vosberg or Mrs. Holt, anything you'd want to add to that, or Mr. Phillips?
I would just add that middle school master scheduling starts in December. So having the accurate student count to work with the students to choose schedules and give allocations to middle schools is very time sensitive.
So Ken, this is Jude. So it's time sensitive that you guys get us the information we're asking for.
And we can get you the numbers of the students that'll be impacted, but I really want to stress right now there is no recommendation to change the existing board policy, which does include grandfathering. So, so that's not being changed. It's just the boundaries themselves.
Right. So the board would not have to take special action, is what you're saying, Ms. Hoadley. The default is grandfathering.
Correct. Now, I think what Mr. Siegel was talking about is expanding that to have the sister schools and lessening impact that way.
All right. Well, we'll all go and review that board policy.
Great idea. This should be part of our internal communications segue.
So Ms. Hoadley, this is Jude, could you just send that out to everybody so we don't have to go look it up? I'm sorry to be lazy.
Okay. And I believe it's on our new website too, right, Earl? It is. Okay. All right, go ahead, David.
All right, and at the last committee of the whole, I introduced the idea of having a speakers bureau, which I think could also be equally called a listening bureau, where we would reach out to groups within the community that we feel it's important to have some sort of a dialogue. I did send out a number of ideas for people to give feedback. I did hear from Mr. Scrivano, thank you. But would be very interested in hearing some response on the ideas of speaking with these three groups: the Rockford Area Association of Realtors, or if we wanted to get more close to the actual realtors, I would be willing to approach different broker houses, the REA. I mentioned that we do have a common interest that kind of transcends bargaining, so we don't have to really worry about stepping on toes, and that has to do with recruiting efforts. And since the REA leadership and I are working with the National Equity Project, there does seem to be a natural agreement that diversity is something that we will keep a sharp eye towards. And I think that there is plenty of discussion area for that to go. And then the third group would be Rockford Promise. as a community entity that exclusively serves Rockford Public School students, I believe that there is a great chance to kind of spread the word both for Rockford Promise and for RPS. And I'm very much open to any ideas or discussion on these or other ideas. Now would be an acceptable time
Okay.
to, you know.
Yeah, I think the only one, I agree that, I think this is a good starting point was my comment back to you. I think the REA one, I think we have to focus that on recruitment and not get into things that we shouldn't be discussing, regarding bargaining issues or anything like that or whatever.
For sure.
But we certainly, have that commonality that they're looking for teachers and so are we, so that's a good thing. And I think the other two are great. I think I know that Dr. Jarrett has given presentations to the realtor group before, and we have Mrs. Fumo involved in Rockford Promise, so we, there's a connection there. So makes sense to me.
Well, I've already reached out to the REA, and they were very willing to have said conversation. So if I have the okie dokie from the group, I will reach out to both Rockford Promise and to the Rockford Area Association of Realtors.
Okay.
And I will then probably be tapping some of the other chairs' liaisons for information to take to them. So I'm not stepping on anyone's toes.
Hey, David, this is Jude.
Yeah, Jude.
So we're working with the REA. I'm trying to pull yours up again. I read through all that earlier, and then, I really do get the promise piece, and I love your comments on there about how people just are totally unaware of what we're doing, and what a shame. And I think there's somebody new in charge of Rockford Promise, isn't there now? She was in the paper the other day. Yeah, that got some nice press. That was good, but I still don't think people understand what it is. What is it? Just a review for me. What is it we're going to do with the REA? We're going to have them participate in the Speakers Bureau. We can't get teachers to serve on committees for us. So, literally, to develop things within their own wheelhouse. Better yet, to step outside and they're all feeling overwhelmed with the situation we're in now. So, what is it we're looking to have them do as part of the Speakers Bureau, please?
I'm just going to speak in broad strokes because I haven't gone into a deep dive with Mel and Chad, but something that seems logical is when we go to recruit teachers, have the REA be able to recruit with us and be able to amplify the message of what the benefits are of coming to Rockford and teaching in Rockford Public Schools. Likewise, we get to, give them the opportunity to help them promote and build their membership. We're not going to get into MOUs and ULPs. We're just looking for teachers Does that make sense, Jude?
So it's probably good my video's off, but we're expecting them to do this for free, right? This is not pretty much everything we try to do with the REA, you're saying no MOUs and the like, but their teachers are looking for reimbursement to do so. And so,
I'm not sure.
I don't know. Oh, okay. So this is REA like leadership you're talking about.
Yes.
This is where we're not connecting. That was my misunderstanding. Oh, okay.
I should have been more clear.
Well, so I see it as being a good thing that the union is, that we look like we're working together toward the rest. And if they're willing to do so as part of their salary, that's great. I just know that our teachers are so overwhelmed, so to try to bring them in to do something else at this point in time is
This
difficult.
really has nothing to do with the present teachers. This is really
Got
a
it.
matter of working with Mel and Chad to promote teaching in Rockford and Rockford Public Schools.
Thank you. Got it now.
Cool. Then my last topic is our topics to bring up to our lobbyist, McGuire Woods. This is an area where I'm sadly going to be not as well informed as many of the other board members who have been around and have more experience with McGuire Woods, and what are the possibilities of taking ideas to them. We threw around a number of ideas when I brought this up at the last committee of the whole, but would love to hear what people would like to bring. We are working on scheduling a time with Mr. Cassidy from thank you, from McGuire Woods. So would like to be able to take what the board has in mind to that meeting.
Yeah, I think one of those topics was funding, and especially where is evidence-based funding going to go and what direction that will take.
Right.
Certainly is an important topic. I think was an unfunded mandates, on there. Okay.
How about capital money? I mean,
Yeah, there you go.
after our report tonight.
It's a good idea. Yeah, capital funding for buildings.
And do we have some sense of what an actual ask would be in a category like capital funding? Do we go to them and say, listen, we've just had a couple of great analyses that have given us some, whatever they like to call it, shovel-ready projects, things that are ready to stimulate the economy, whatever. And is this what we're asking McGuire Woods to really push?
I think we need to spend some time continuing to aggregate what the board's priorities are. Last year, what we were able to do with facilities specifically was develop the rules if it ever gets funded. One of our big successes was it will be based on our rating category for evidence-based funding, and they have also committed to the idea of matching, which was a really important concept, so that more projects can get funded. So those were our two big priorities on the rules of funding. That's the good news. The bad news is there's no money. There are a lot of the money is tied to expansion of gaming. The money is tied to a number of capital. A lot of the capital funding is tied to revenue sources that have to build up. Like one of them that's been successful has been marijuana. As cannabis has been a successful funding source, but it takes time to build some of those up. So I think that'll be a great topic. Knowing we have this massive facilities need, knowing we have evidence-based funding needs, I think funding in all areas should be one of the priorities. It's kind of a given. And then we certainly open to other projects that the board has in mind as well as we talk to Mr. Cassidy. I think what he's likely to tell us right now is, and it's really good this is after the election, because until we know what happens with both the presidential election, which will probably have a pretty big impact on what the timeline looks like for any kind of state and municipal bailout, and another round of COVID relief for lots of different governmental entities, what size that is and what the reality is, number one. And then number two, there's a massive income tax initiative on the ballot right now called the fair tax, if that passes, evidence-based funding increases are actually probably almost a certainty in this upcoming year. If that does not pass, which I think is likely, then there will be significant revenue shortages for another fiscal year. So I think it's good that we've got this scheduled for sometime in the next 10 days or so, when we at least have a little, our crystal ball will be a little less hazy then.
All right. Well, we have items to talk about. Not sure how effective it's going to be, but we'll give it our best shot. That's about all I have for new information for tonight. Review of consent items. We are scheduled to take a vote on the student attendance boundary realignment on November 10th. And at the November 24th. Just going to have a follow-up on what we've chatted about tonight. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. I'll present the governance committee report here. We just have one board policy 2.50 that's being updated. It's a chronology of all of the events of filling vacancies and appointing and having election results and whatever. So it's all dated and updated as to when those and what sub-districts they were in. So that is all that policy revision is an update on that. And if there's no questions, we'll be voting to approve that board policy revision on November 10th. For the preview of consent items coming from governance, it will, for the 10th, are meeting minutes, contract, purchase orders, maybe a workers' comp case, freedom of information log, and for the 24th, it's meeting minutes, contract, purchase orders, and the freedom of information log. I don't believe we have any speakers for tonight. We don't? Okay. Is there any other further agenda items? Dr. Jarrett.
I just wanted to confirm that I have the right items that are going to be carried over, so that Mrs. Fromm and I are on the same page, and Mrs. Hoadley from our governance guru here. What I have down is that we are going to be bringing back all 3 of the Tier 2 position PDSAs for a further dialogue, coaches, MCL, and CILs.
Right, for questions.
From the planning committee, I heard that we are going to be bringing back the facilities conditions assessment, and we can, at a minimum, expect some conversation about what's embedded in the HVAC number, because as a good starting point, but there will probably be a number of other questions, and that Mr. Phillips will need to be available for that conversation. So we'll ask maybe if we can submit some questions in advance so he can have time to prepare, because some of that stuff is very technical. Reading Horizons will come back also from the planning committee, just to have further conversations. I think in general we want more discussion about how we're measuring success on these PDSAs. There seem to be some common themes. And we also need to be prepared to have follow-up information on grandfathering, which is the conversation with grandfathering was largely addressed, but some of the specifics of the numbers in terms of how grandfathering would impact the numbers. And I think those were the things that carried over. Did I miss anything, Mrs. Brown?
Those are all the things that I had marked.
Mrs. Hoadley, did I miss anything? Okay.
Very good.
Hey, Ken, this is Jude.
Go ahead.
So when we're talking about funding, and one of the things Mr. Rollins brought up was that tax, and I asked that question about it, and then somebody else said, oh, it wouldn't go over right now. There really wasn't a conversation by the whole board on that. Is there any way we could put that in a future meeting, since that was, since we started the conversation and didn't complete it?
The county sales tax, Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes, please. I'd like to know some more information about it, the reality of it, what the last, because they did get a 0.5% already, and you know how that passed, and just what everybody thinks about it. We're going to need money for capital, and that was one suggestion, and it was just let go.
Okay, we'll add that. Okay, if there's no other recommendations or comments or agenda items, I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
Hello?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just one quick thing.
Okay.
As a follow-up, can I suggest that we strongly consider, and I know there's no exact time frame, but what I'd like to suggest is I think there's a lot of things to unpack in that latest facilities report, is that we consider having, and I'm sorry to do this, and I would volunteer to do it, but to have some kind of subcommittee or a couple of us go into that in more detail so that we can, from a board standpoint, come back to one of the future committee of the whole meetings to go into some of the details on this, because I think there's going to be a lot to do on this, is my gut check.
Well, it would fall under the Planning and Development Committee, and I think that's fine. I guess I would just personally say, if the most important part to me would be prioritizing what's the most critical to do and how we're going to fund it. I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time on details of things that were way down on the list of priorities, because we wouldn't want to do those right away anyway, and we wouldn't have the money either. So I think we should, the main thing we should be focusing on as a board is getting feedback from the facilities team on what are the priorities, and how do we rank them, and how do we pay for them. Any other thoughts?
I'm good with that.
As a next step, we'll be prepared to bring this back, and then we'll see where that discussion takes us. But thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Connor.
Okay.
Yeah, I will just say this. The suggestion was not to get lost in the details, but I suspect that you heard tonight a question about the HVAC. I think we're going to have that on other things. And if I might say so, if you look at the schools, there were some surprises in there. So all I'm saying is that it might make sense for one or two of us to look into some of that to be prepared. Because I think that the question of the priorities and the funding, I think is going to be wrapped up in a fair amount of detail, is my gut check. But I mean, I don't want to do what people don't want to be done, but I think there's a lot of things to unpack in that report.
Okay. All right. We'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Conn.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Same sign. We are adjourned at 8:20. Thank you.